Hi, this is Ali Arango from Game Visuals, and today I want to show you how to go from an exterior starship scene to an interior starship scene. So basically our goal is to have a player walk up to a spaceship, press a button, and then go inside of that spaceship. And when the character goes inside of that spaceship, the scene will change. The character will be able to walk around inside of the spaceship, and then the character will be able to leave the spaceship, changing the scene again so that the character goes back to an exterior scene where you see the spaceship from the outside. So let's get started. Okay, what you see in front of you is the Gdevelop startup screen. I like to start up these tutorials where we're pretty much starting right from the beginning. So we're going to click on create a new project. We have this create a new game menu that pops up. We're going to scroll down. We're going to select empty game. Now we have this panel, this project panel pop up to the side here. What we want to do is look to this plus button that's below scenes. We're going to left click there, and we have a new scene that was made. We're going to left click on these three dots, and then we're going to select rename. We're going to name this new scene just one. We're calling it one just because one is very easy to quickly enter in for the scene. I'm going to left click down here to get out of that menu select. So now that we have this, we're going to look to our scene name one, and we're going to left click right on this panel. Okay, so now that we left clicked on that, now we have this object panel that opened up to the right here. We're going to click this plus button here. When we did that, we had a menu pop up that's an add a new object menu. We're going to left click on sprite. And then now we have this other menu pop up that has our object name, properties, as well as behaviors. We're going to change the object name to player. Okay, so now that we have this object named player, now what we're going to do is we're going to look to our right. We're going to click this plus button to the right. We're then going to click the plus button to the left. And we're going to go to where I have a sprite set up. So I'm going to select desktop. I'm going to click on spaceship scene tutorial. And then for this first sprite, we want this idle sprite. So I'm going to left click here, and then I'm going to click open. Okay, so now basically what we have is just this one sprite here, and we have this animation here that's labeled as 0. What we're going to do is where it says optional animation name, we're going to left click here, and then we're going to name this idle, since this is going to represent our idle animation. What we want to do now is we want to add more animation to this. We're going to add a top-down walking animation. To do that, we're going to go to our right. We're going to click on that plus button to the right. Now we're going to go to the plus button to the left, and we're going to go back to where I had those sprites set up, which is this spaceship scene tutorial. And now I'm going to click on the spaceship scene player animation. I'm going to double click here. Then I have another folder. I'm going to double click here. So I have all the sprites right here. I'm going to, on my keyboard, hold Control and then press A. This selected all of the sprites. So that shortcut was just Control A, allows you to select all of these sprites. I'm then going to click open. Okay, so now we have all of these sprites here. So we have one animation that's just one frame, which is idle. We have now a second animation, which is a bunch of sprites. So the first animation is named idle, and it's animation number 0 named idle, and then we have animation number 1. So for this, where we see optional animation name, we're going to click here, and we're going to name this walk. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want this to be a looping animation. So see where this says don't loop? We're going to left click there for loop. And then now for this preview right here, or this time, let's click this and see how this looks. So this is showing us how our animation will look. And that's actually not bad. I'm going to click OK. I think I want this to be slightly faster. So I'm going to change this to 0.05. And then I'm going to click just to get out of that selection, then click preview. So I think I want this. So I'm going to click OK. So now that we have this set up, you can adjust your timing as you see right here. So 0.08 was slower, whereas 0.05 is slightly faster. So now that we have this, what we're going to do is click okay. We have our animation set up before we click apply. That's why I paused. Let's go to behavior. So our animation sprites are in. However, we want to go to behaviors. Gdevelop is a spectacular piece of software. One of the things that's spectacular about it is how easily we can set up to move our characters around, particularly this player character. So we're going to click this plus button here to bring up these behaviors here. Then we're going to scroll down and we're going to look for top-down movement. So we're going to left click here. We have these options here. We're going to scroll down. These options here are fine. So now we're going to click apply. So now we have our player sprites in as well as a top-down behavior on our player character. Okay, I'm going to roll my mouse wheel back and you can see this area here, which is defined by this square black outline. So this is our work area. What I want to do is change this. So to do that, what I'm going to do is go to our upper left. I'm going to click on this project manager button. I'm going to go to where we see game settings. I'm then going to go to properties. And then where we have this game Windows width, I'm going to change this to 1280. And then for the game window height, I'm going to change this to 720. And then with those changes there, I just left click to try to get off of that input there. So anyway, this is correct. I'm going to click apply. And when we clicked apply, see how we don't see any change in this? I'm going to roll my mouse wheel back so you can see better. We don't see any change. What you can do to have this area here reflect the changes you just made is go to this where it says undo the last changes. This is kind of strange, but this works. We're going to just left click there. And then once we left click there, now we can see, I'm just holding the middle mouse button to pan our view. Now we can see the changes here. So our work area has changed to the settings that we set in our game settings. Okay, so now that we have our area here set up, let's left click on our player and then left click and drag our player out. So here's our player as the player will appear on the screen. This is too big, so what we can do is hold the shift key down. We'll hold the shift key down and then we'll hover over this corner right here. And by doing that, I'm still holding shift, I can constrain, which means that I can shrink, just let go of shift. We can shrink our player down without having our player lose its constraints. Like it looks how it's supposed to look. So what I'm going to do is just pull the player down here. And remember that behavior we put on? I'm going to click this preview button right here. So now you can see that as we move our player around, just from when we put that behavior on, our player responds. However, our player is not showing the animations that we set on the player. We'll set that up later. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to go to this project panel. We're going to click the X button to temporarily take that away. We're going to go to our properties panel. And, okay, we'll leave that there. What we're going to do now is we're going to go to the upper right. We're going to click this plus button. We're going to go to sprite. And then we're going to name this sprite, because the reason why we went to that plus button was to bring in a new sprite. We're going to name this ship. So then we're going to click this plus button to the right. We're going to click the plus button to the left. And now we're going to go to where I have these sprites set up. So here is our spaceship. So we're going to click open. So now this is fine without behaviors. It's fine just how it is. So we're going to click apply. Then we're going to left click on the ship and then drag this out here. So the ship is too big. So we're going to hold shift. We're going to go to the corner so we can constrain this. And we're going to shrink the ship down some. We're going to shrink it down more. Looks good to me like that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set up our player so that the player animates. So in this screen right here where we see this one here, I'm going to click this X button and temporarily take that away. On this screen, this is where we set up our art. Where we see our events, that's where we set up our programming. So I'm going to left click on events. When we click here, we see there are no events here. Events are composed of conditions and actions. Add your first event using the first buttons of the toolbar. So what we want to do is click right here. And this is an event. An event is composed of generally composed of a condition as well as an action. A condition says when something happens to do something. The action says what to do. So this is basically conditions deal with when, and this deals with what to do. So what we want to do is to program the animations for our player. So we're going to click add condition. And what we're going to go do is go down to top-down movement. We're going to left click, and then we see this that says is moving. We're going to left click there. We're going to click on our player. I'm just left clicking just to get out of that selection option. Now I'm going to click OK. Okay, so this says when the player is moving, we want something to happen. So this right here is a condition. We can have something called subconditions. So to get a subcondition, if I click here, this is how we get a sub event, I should say. This is how we get a sub event, right? See when I clicked here, how this is not highlighted for us to select it. So what we need to do is click so that we have this blue line selected. So basically when I click around this area, towards the bottom of these two rows, we have the ability to add a sub event. And that's what we want to do. So we're going to left click on add a sub event. So what we want to happen is we're going to go to add a condition. So this is a sub condition. So whatever we add here is dependent on this. The reason why we're adding a sub event to this is we want to only be able to have to be concerned about telling Gdevelop to do something when our player is moving once. And then we can add these sub events underneath here and they'll know that they're dependent on this. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to add condition and we're going to go to keyboard. So we're going to scroll down. We're going to go to key pressed. Now here we can go through all of these different keys that we can select here by scrolling down. I want the left key select. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold shift and select capital L. I let go of shift. Now I'm just typing out EFT. So now Gdevelop has this option here saying, oh, do you want something to work with the left arrow key? I'm like, yes, that's what I want. So I'm going to left click there. And then I'm just clicking here to get out of that, the option to select that. Then I'm going to click OK. So we have this when the player is moving, and then we have left click key is pressed. So this is dependent on that, and that's what we want. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to add an action. So this is when these things are happening, when the player is moving and when the left key is pressed, Gdevelop's like, what do you want me to do? That's what we're going to do by adding this action. So now we're going to click on add action. We're going to go to sprite, animations and images. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to change the animation by name. We're going to select player because that's the animation we want to work with. And because this is something that we named ourselves, we chose the name. And what we chose the name was walk. Because we chose the name, the reason why I'm saying that is we need to put quotations around this. So we're going to hold shift, put quotation, W-A-L-K, hold shift, and then I'm putting another quotation. So then I'm going to click OK. Okay, what we have set up as far as our animation is our character is actually a top-down movement. If our character was set for isometric, we would have to do more work than what we have to do here. However, our character, because our character is straight top-down, we only had to set that one walking animation, and the way we're going to set things up, that's all we're going to need. However, we do need to have that animation activate for all of our arrow keys. So that's what we're going to set up here now. So to do that, what we're going to do is we already have this set up. When I say this, I mean our left key is pressed and then our set animation player to walk. One of the nice things in Gdevelop is you can save a lot of time by copying and pasting things. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on our main event here. And then with this clicked on, we're going to go to our add a sub event button. We're going to click this 3 times. So 1, 2, 3. And that just gave us the additional sub-events that we need to set up for the rest of our arrow key. So what we're going to do is we're going to left click here, and then we're going to right click, select copy. Then we're going to left click here. We're going to right click and select paste. And then we're going to do that again, paste. And then we're going to do that again, paste. Okay, so now what we have is, okay, we have this, these all say left key. However, this set animation player is already set to walk. So what we can do is we can either double click here. This will take us back into setting up left key is pressed, or we can just left click here and then enter in capital R-I-H-T for right. So now our right key is pressed. So now when you press left or right, the walk animation will activate. So we're going to go here and we're going to change this to up, capital U-P. And while you didn't see up pop up here, that should be correct. When you're putting in your arrow keys, you mainly, you need a capital to have your arrow key, work. So we're going to click here. We're going to enter in capital D. We can see down here. So now we are set up to have our player walk, show its animation, its walk animation as the player walks. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to left click and we're going to get rid of these extra things. So I'm left clicking, then right clicking, selecting delete, left clicking, right clicking, selecting delete. See this arrow over here to the left? When I click this, all of these are going to still be there. However, they're going to be hidden so that they're not taking up space because this work is done. So I'm about to click it. I didn't click it yet. Now I just clicked it. So we can click this again and bring those back, but we don't need to have to see those options for now. That work is done. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to click here. So we have this blue line going here. We're going to go to add a new empty event. We're going to go to add condition. We're going to go down to top down movement. We're going to go to is moving. We're going to select player because player is what we're still working with our animation. Previously we set up for when our character is moving. So now we're in is moving again. However, this time we're going to select invert condition. And what this invert condition basically does is it means the invert of is moving is when the player is not moving. That's what we're setting up now. So we're going to click OK. Okay, so when we're setting up for our player is moving, we have to set up for a bunch of different buttons. For our player is not moving, where we're setting it up now, we don't have a lot of different buttons, so we can set this up easily. So we don't need to make sub-events. So we're going to go to add action. We're going to go to sprite, animations and images. And then we're going to go to change the animation by name. We're going to select player. And then the name of the animation that we want is idle. So we're going to, because we picked the name, we're going to hold shift, put in a quotation, type in IDLE, put in another quotation. That's what I meant when I said shift. I was just talking about putting a quotation in. You don't have to hold shift. It was just putting a quotation in. So I'm going to click OK. Okay, so with that set up, we're going to click this button right here, which will launch a preview of our scene. So now when we press our arrow keys, we can see that our player character is animating correctly. I want to say thanks to my daughter, Aliana Arango, as well as my wife, Susan Arango. My daughter designed the ship. My wife, Susan Arango, helped color the ship. Also, as far as getting these sprites, I will put a link in the description so that you can get to these sprites so you can follow along with this tutorial. So I'm just going to click this button to exit out of that preview scene. Okay, so what we want to happen is, I'm going to roll my mouse wheel to zoom back. We want our player to walk towards the ship and then to press a button where the player goes into the interior of the ship. I'm just rolling my mouse wheel to zoom back. I'm going to click here to get rid of that properties panel. I'm going to click right here to have us show our property manager window. Now, the reason why we set up the animation for the player first is because what we want to do is we don't want to have to, if possible, repeat actions. So what we're going to do is, since this is already set up in this scene, and we need another scene for the ship interior scene, if we didn't do things how we did them now, we would have to reset up the animation for our player. However, the way we're going to do things now is the animation for our player will already be set up. So how is that? How are we going to do that? We're going to go to our scene 1 here. And what we're going to do is we're going to left click, and then we're going to select copy. So then we're going to click the plus button, and then we're going to, where we see this new scene popped up after clicking plus, we're going to click here, and then we're going to select paste. So now what we have here is a copy of 1. So we have another scene that's a copy of this scene, and it's also a copy of all the work that we did for setting up the animation of our player as well, which is a good thing. Okay, so, and I know when I do the copy and paste, you see I have these like extras. I'm not sure how not to do that. Still learning Gdevelop myself more and more as I go along. So what I'm going to do to get rid of this is I'm just going to click on these 3 dots. I'm going to select delete to get rid of that extra scene. Now here's our copy of 1. So we're going to click here. We're going to select rename, and we're going to rename this to 2. And the reason why we chose 2 is just so it's very simple to put that in there. We put that in so that would be simple and easy to work with the other scene. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to click on this 2, which is scene 2. We're going to left click there. I'm going to roll my mouse wheel back, and now you can see here is a copy of scene 1, which is scene 2. So the reason why we did this was we wanted to have the animation set up for our player. We didn't want to have to repeat that. However, we don't need this ship here for scene 2. So we're going to left click on this, right click, and then select delete to get rid of the ship there. We also don't need the ship here. So what we're going to do is left click on this. We're going to left click here and then select delete here. Then I'm going to click OK. And you'll see that when I click back I'm going to close this project panel. I'm going to click that. You can get that back, by the way, by just clicking there. I'm going to click on scene 1, and here in scene 1 you can see that the ship is still there. I'm going to click here to go back to scene 2, and now here is scene 2, which has the ship not there, which is what we want. So now we're ready to bring in our ship interior scene. Okay, so what we're going to do is go to our upper right to where we see click to add a new object. We're going to click this plus button. We're going to go to sprite. We're going to change this name, the object name, to ship, capital I, and then spell out the rest of interior. We're then going to go to the plus button to the right, the plus button to the left. We're going to go to where our sprites are at. We're then going to click on ship drawing 1, click open. We don't need a behavior. There's only 1 frame, so we don't need to work with previews or anything like that, or the preview, I should say. So we're going to click apply. Okay, now what we're going to do is left click on ship interior. We're going to drag this out. So here's our ship interior. Now I'm purposely putting this over top of our player. We don't want the ship to be over top of our player. We want the player to be over top of the ship. How do we do this? Well, the way we can do this is I'm going to click to take away this project menu here. Underneath here, you can see our properties menu. See this Z order? Whatever is lower will be more in the background. So this is set for 2. So I'm going to change this to 1. And just by doing that, well, now they're on the same. Basically, for the background, you want to have this be a lower number. For the foreground, you want this to be a higher number. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to make this just 2 for our player. Now I want the player is supposed to be able to walk around the ship. So I'm going to zoom back. I'm going to hold shift to constrain our proportions. And I am holding shift and letting go of shift now, making our ship big enough for our player to walk around. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at our player size compared to the rooms on the ship. I think I want the player to start off here. Rolling the mouse wheel back, holding shift. So now I'm going to zoom in. That looks good to me. Okay, so we have our player interior selected. See in this properties panel where we have this setting that says lock position, angle, and editor. If I put a check mark here, now we can't move the ship, which is a good thing. So once we did that, we also can't select the ship. However, if we want to select it, if we click instances and then click our ship interior, now we can select from here. So if we wanted to turn that back off again, we could turn that back off again. However, it's good to have it on, so I'm going to click here to take that away, and that was the instances button right here is how I got that. So I'm holding the middle mouse button now to pan the view. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to click our project manager. We want to go back to our scene 1. And what we want to do is set things up so that when we walk and we push a button, we'll go to the interior of the ship. So that to do that, we're clicked on scene 1. I'm going to click this to take away that project manager menu. We're going to go to our 1 event here. We're going to click here. And then we're going to go to, we clicked here just so we have this blue outline around this event here so we can make a new event. And then for this new event, what we want to do is set up a collision. So we're going to click Add Condition. We're going to go to Common Conditions for all events. We're going to go to where we see Collision. We're going to select Collision again. Then we're going to select Player. And then for Object, we're going to select the ship. And basically what this is doing is we're telling Gdevelop when these two objects collide, make something happen. So now we're going to click OK. Okay, what we want to do now is we want to make sure we're selected on here. So we have this blue outline around here. Now what we want to do is add 2 sub-events to this event. So we're going to go to our sub-event button. We're going to click this twice. So what we want to do is have these 2 sub-events do something when the player is in collision with the ship. And what that is we want the player to press a button and then change the scene. We also, well, I'll explain that first. We're going to go to Add Condition. We're going to go to Keyboard. We're going to go to Key Pressed. We're going to click here and press Z. I'm going to left click on Z. Then I'm going to click OK. So what we're saying is when the player is in collision with the ship and Z is pressed, we want something to happen. So to have that something happen, we're going to click Add Action. We're going to go to Scene. And what we want to do is go to Pause and Start a new scene. So we're going to left click here. The name of this scene is 2. This needs to be in quotation. It is important that this is in quotation. So I'm going to put in a quotation, put in 2, and then I'm going to click OK. Okay, for this next part, I'm going to click the preview button. I'm going to show you. When we press to go to the ship, our player walks right through the ship. We don't want that. We want the player to collide with the ship. So I'm going to click this X button to get out of here. So how do we do that? That's actually fairly easy. When we add a condition, we're saying when something happens, right? Do something. Or same thing with a sub-event. The sub-event is just dependent on this. For this, we want something to happen when we're in collision with the ship. However, we want this we want Gdevelop to look for this constantly, not particularly at a particular instance other than when the player's in collision with the ship. So if you want to have Gdevelop constantly look for something, you leave this blank. So we're going to go to Add Action. We're going to go to Common Action for all objects. Then we're going to go to Position. if you want to make something be a solid object, there's multiple ways of doing that in Gdevelop. We're going to choose this way, separate two objects. We're going to select the player first. It's important which is on top here, which you select first, because this is movable. This will be not movable here. So we have the player selected first, or up, it's up on the screen here. So the player will be movable. The second object will not be movable. So we're going to click here and then select the ship. And then we're going to click OK. Okay, so now we have that set up. Let's try this out. So now we have our player walk up and pressing the arrow key. You see how our player no longer goes through the ship. So now what we are about to do is we're going to press the Z key. And what we want to happen is the player to go to the interior of the ship. So I'm pressing the Z key now. And now we have the player inside of the ship. However, when the player walks, we want the camera to move with the player. We also don't want the player to be able to walk through this space right here, just to be able to walk through the rooms. So what we're going to do is we're going to set that up now. Kind of looking at my player animation, looks pretty good. So I'm going to click this X button right here. And yeah, so we are currently in scene 1, the events. So right here is where we set up our artwork. Roll the mouse wheel to zoom back, and events is where we're setting up where we set up our programming. Okay, see how we have this say pause the scene and start 2? That pause is important, and you'll see why later. Okay, so we need to go to scene 2. So how do we get there? We don't see scene 2 here. What we do is we go to our upper left, our project manager, we left click here, and then now we can see here's scene 1, here's scene 2. So now when we left click on scene 2, we can see here is where we work with our art in scene 2, and where we click to events, now this is where we work with our programming with scene 2. So I'm going to click here to temporarily take away this project menu. Okay, so what we see here is the work copy from scene 1. What we're going to do is click here. Remember, we click here, we lose our ability to click this sub-event button. We click here, we have our options. So we're going to click the plus button here. What we need to do is we need to have a way to get back to the exterior of the ship. So we need to set up a collision here with the ship as well. So we're going to, not with the ship, we're inside the ship. We need to set up another collision though. So we're going to put an event here. However, we need something to collide with. So we're going to click 2. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to pan the view. So we start here. So what I'm going to do is click here. I'm going to select sprite. I'm going to name this button. And then I'm going to click this plus button right here. Now in Gdevelop, we can go to here, this other plus button. This is how we would bring in graphics. However, in Gdevelop, there's something called Piskel, which is a graphic design editor built into Gdevelop, which is spectacular. So we're going to click Edit with Piskel. And we're going to actually make a button that we can bump into or collide with, I should say, that will allow us to go back to the exterior scene. So we're going to click here. I'm going to left click and drag on this blue, left click and drag here. I'm going to go to this paint bucket, click here to fill this square. That's all we really need. I'm going to name this button. This isn't necessary to name this. I just chose to name it button. It's easy to do, so why not? We're then going to click save. So now we have our button. We don't need to have anything set up for this button. We can click apply now. Okay, so with this button made, what we're going to do is left click here, left click and drag this button out here. We're going to put this right here. I'm just changing the size to make it wider. And what we want to do is we're going to make it so that when our player walks back and collides with this button, we can press another key to have our player go back to the exterior view. Okay, so I'm going to go to events. I'm going to click here to move that out of the way. We're going to go to this event here. We're going to click add a condition, common conditions for all objects, collision, collision again. We're going to select player. We're then going to go to object and select button. This is the button that we just made. We're now going to click OK. Okay, so now we want a sub-event of this. Remember, the sub-events are dependent on this. We use sub-events because that way we only have to have this one time. So with this selected, where we can see the blue outline around it, we're going to click sub-event. So then with the sub-event, we're going to go to add a condition. This is where we're going to set up to have our button pressed. We're going to go to keyboard, key pressed. We're going to choose the M key. And when we just choose the key, a lowercase M is fine. We're going to click OK. We could have also scrolled down through that menu. Okay, so now we say, okay, when a player is in collision with the button, as well as the button being pressed, we want something to happen. So we're going to click add in action. So we're going to go to scene. So what we want is, and this is important, when our player starts off in scene 1, the player walks across the screen, goes up to the ship, and then the player presses the button to go into the ship. If we didn't choose this where we say stop and go back to our previous scene, and previously we set up pause and start a new scene. When we went back to the scene, you would find that the player was away from the ship, which looks kind of strange. With this setup, the player will be right back where the player first enters the ship. It makes things look correct. So we're going to select stop and go back to previous scene. Then we're then going to click OK. Okay, so what we're about to do is test this out. Now, one thing that's important with this, because things are set up to work from 1, if we start a preview here, we're going to start in events 2. Now this says go back to the previous pause scene. There has been no previously paused scene if we start in 2, so this will not work correctly. So to have this work correctly, be aware you have to go to the project manager menu, click 1. We need to start from scene 1, so we need to preview from here. And this will allow us to work correctly. I just want you to be aware of that. If you start the preview in scene 2, things will not work correctly. So you want to start in scene 1. I'm rolling my mouse with a zoom back. So now that we're here in scene 1, I'm going to click launch preview of the scene. So I'm using the arrow keys to walk across. So we're here at the ship. We're going to press the Z key. I'm pressing now. There we go. So now we're in the ship. So now we can walk around the ship. We're in our interior ship. Now we want to go back. So we're going to go back to here. We're going to press the M key, and now we are back to the exterior scene of our ship. Okay, so when we click on scene 2, now I'm going to click here to temporarily take this away. While we won't be able to, if we preview from here, we won't be able to go back to the previous scene. If I click the preview here in scene 2, because we're on scene 2 events, when I press the arrow keys, you can see that we can travel through the ship. However, the camera doesn't follow the player. So if we want to actually travel, we actually basically walk off the screen. So what we want to do is to fix that now. So I'm going to click this X button to go out of the preview. Then I'm going to click here. So now we have this highlighted, this event highlighted. Okay, so with that highlighted, we're going to click here to make a new event. We want this event to happen all of the time. So remember, conditions say when something happens, do this. We want this Gdevelop to pretty much do this all the time, which is going to be track our player. So when you want something to happen particularly all the time, for the most part, you don't put a condition, you leave that empty. So now we're going to click add action. We're going to go to layers and cameras. Then we're going to go to, we have normally, you might want to put on center the camera on an object. However, we're going to use center the object on a camera within limits. So we're going to left click here. We're going to select the player. So we're telling the camera to center on a player. For here, we're going to press 0, 0. For this, we're going to enter in 1920. And then for the Y, that's the X position we did that. For the Y position, we're going to enter in 1080. So with that done, we're going to click OK. Okay, so what should happen now, we're going to click play. The camera should, there we go. It's tracking our player. However, when we get near the edge of the screen doesn't track, which is what we want. So that's good. Now what we want now is see how we can walk through these areas here. We don't want that. We want to only be able to walk through the open areas. So we'll work on that now. So how do we set it up so we can only walk through the open areas? What we're going to do is we're going to go back to where we work on our art. I'm rolling the mouse wheel to zoom back. I'm holding the middle mouse button to pan the view. What we're going to do is we're going to go to our right. We're going to click plus. We're going to bring in a new sprite. We're going to name this sprite block. And we're going to make this in the Pisco Editor. So we're going to click this plus button here to the right. And then we're going to left click right on the text that says Edit with Piskel. So we're going to go to this color selector down here. We're going to click in the green, click and drag. I'm going to click and drag in this green here. Then I'm going to go to the paint bucket, click here. I'm going to name this block. Again, the name isn't important. I figure it's easy. Why not? We're going to click save. And just like that, we have this block right here. So now we're going to click apply. Doesn't need any behaviors or anything. And what we're going to do with this block is we're going to left click on the block and then drag this onto our work area. So here's the block right here. Okay, so we're going to put this block where we want things to, we're going to make sure we have blocks selected here. And the areas where we want to not be able to go, we're going to put this block around. So I'm going to right click here, click add instance of block, right click here, 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 add instance of block. An instance is just basically a copy. So what we're going to do is I'm going to roll the mouse wheel in. So with areas like this, we'll click here, we'll drag the block out. And I'm dragging this just so this area, this block is going to block us from being able to move from here. So I'll right click here, add instance of block. I'll do the same thing here. And then we have this area here, so I can actually move this up and then pull that down like that. A few different ways of doing this. This is my current way that I do it. There's multiple ways of doing things like this in Gdevelop. If there's a better way of doing this, please let me know. This is my way for now. So I am just taking these blocks and I'm basically putting them to right up against the areas that we can walk through. I'll click on block here, add instance of block. So I'm just putting these in the areas where I don't want. I'll left click here. The player to be able to walk through. That's what I'm doing now. And I tried to put blocks where I thought that the where I would need blocks at. So here, I'll put this here, put this here. Rolling the mouse wheel back. So I'll click on the block. So you click the block first, add an instance of the block. You can drag the block out. If you want to have the exact shape of the block, what you can do is left click on the block, right click, copy, and then right click, paste, then you'll have that same shape of the block. I'm just looking where we put that at. So here, I'll right click, copy, right click, paste. That there. I'll copy, paste. Put this here. Copy, paste. That there. Oh, right click, copy, paste. Hold the middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to take this in a, that's interesting. Rotate like that. Copy, paste. Copy, paste. Okay, now that we have all of this work done, we're going to go to Events. We're going to click here. So we have this blue outline around this event. We're going to click to make a new event. We're going to go to Add Condition. We're going to go to Common Conditions for all objects. We're then going to go to Collision. We're then going to select Collision again. We're going to select Player. Then we're going to select Block. Then we're going to click OK. So now what we're going to do is go to Add Action. So we're saying when the player's in collision with a block, do something. We're going to click Add Action. We're going to go to Common Conditions for all, Position. We're going to go to Separate Two Objects. We're going to left click here. It's important that the first thing you select is the thing that moves, which is the player that you want to move. So there's the player. Then we're going to click the object, and the object is the block. We're now going to click OK. Okay, so because all of the blocks are instances of what we have the programming on here, which is block, they all will not allow the player to move through it. However, we want to have things set up so that it doesn't look like the player is pushing against the green blocks. We want to have it look like the player is moving through what's supposed to be empty space and not moving through what's not empty space. So to do that, we're going to click here. So we have this highlighted blue. We're going to click plus to make a new event. We're going to click Add Condition. We're going to go to Scene. We're going to select at the beginning of the scene. We're going to click OK. And then at the beginning of the scene, we're saying Gdevelop, at the beginning of the scene, we want you to do something. So we're going to click Add Action. So we tell Gdevelop what we want it to do. And what we want it to do is we're going to go to Common Action for all objects. We're going to go to Visibility. And we want to hide the block or the blocks or the instances of this block. So we'll select block. We'll then click OK. Okay, so there's another object we want to hide at the beginning of the scene as well. So we're going to click, actually what we can do is we can click here. We can right click, select copy, then right click and select paste. And then what we can do is click to change the object. And what we want to select is button. So now we have at the beginning of the scene, the block will be hidden as well as the button that lets us go back to the interior of the ship. So we're going to click here to try this out. So now when we walk, we can't go through. We can go through where we're supposed to go through. However, we can't go outside of the ship. So we can move through the ship. Now we wanted like here, we can actually go through here. We could also put a block there. So we can move through the ship. And now I left this open because this was actually the where we come into the ship at. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to click on our project manager button. We're going to go back to scene 1. We're going to roll this back. We're going to test out to make sure that everything is working. So let's launch a preview of the scene. So now I'm pressing the arrow keys to walk across to our ship. We're going to press the Z key. So now we're in the interior of the ship. So we're walking through the ship. We are walking through what we're supposed to be able to walk through and not walking through what we're not supposed to be able to walk through. The camera is following our player. So now we're going to go back to here. And we're going to press the M key. So now we are back outside of the ship. So this is working well. Okay, I hope you learned something from this tutorial, and I hope that you liked the tutorial. Okay, guys, that's it for the tutorial. For all of those of you out there who like the videos on this channel and reshare these videos, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And for those of you who are new to this channel, if you like the videos on this channel and you would like to see more, please subscribe, and thank you for viewing.